was wearing a blue and green dress when I met my husband, and I figure they're the fashion for me." Lewis stopped at the gate and said politely, "How do you do, Mrs. Baderhooven-Listeraw?" She looked up and smiled. "I do splendidly, Lewis. How about yourself?" Lewis shrugged and said he was okay. Both he and Maple knew he was confused about his identity. They'd discussed the matter on several occasions during the past year. It was that year that had seen them go from casual acquaintances to intimate friends. Sympathy was the catalyst that drew them together. For the previous May, they had both suffered a crisis in their personal lives. First, Lewis had discovered the shocking news that he was adopted. Then, a few days later, Maple's husband, Wickham Baderhooven-Listeraw, died after a bad bout of bookworms. Maple nodded at Lewis's fishing pole and said, "Going after the big one again, I see. That's good, Lewis. Luck often sides with persistence." Lewis smiled thinly. "I hope it sides with me today." "Me too." "Thanks. So, guess I'll be going now." Maple bobbed her head, raised her garden trowel, and pointed it at Lewis. "Should you stumble across a patch of free time in the next week or so, why don't you pop by and pay me a proper visit?" "I will," Lewis replied sincerely. Visiting Maple was never a chore. Lewis crossed through Slippery Falls Park and halted at a 6-foot-high iron fence protecting pedestrians from a precipitous 200-foot drop into the river gorge below. Lewis passed his rod through the fence, removed his shoes and socks, scaled the barrier, and dropped down onto a narrow ledge of rock. The ledge was broken in places, irregular of plane, and suspended high over a line of jagged boulders hugging the riverbank below. Any normal person in such a position would have trembled with fright. Not Lewis. He grabbed his rod and started across the near-vertical cliff face with the sure-footed confidence of a goat. Lewis's relaxed manner on the cliff was in stark contrast with his typical mental state, since learning he was not the natural progeny of his parents, Martha and Avery Hinton. According to the story he had been told, Avery was walking on Hidden Lane when an unfamiliar woman stepped from behind a tree and placed a basket before him. Obviously distressed and speaking in heavily accented English, the woman told Avery, "He Louis, my boy. Please, mister, for you to keep care." Avery had stared wide-eyed at the woman, then bent to peer in the basket. When he looked up, the woman had withdrawn into the surrounding forest and disappeared. Avery carried the basket home to Martha, who took one look at the child swaddled within and fell in love. Later that evening, while removing soiled blankets from the basket, Martha found a sealed envelope. Printed on the envelope were the words, "Give when little man." The envelope and presumed letter within disturbed Martha. Having already decided that Lewis was hers to keep, she spent the next 2 years anguishing over the missive before mentioning it to Avery. She did so casually one evening at dinner. "Sweetheart, how old were you when you started shaving?" 16 or thereabouts," Avery replied. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, well, because there was a letter for Lewis in the basket he came home in. It says, 'Give when little man.'" Martha ignored the incredulous look on her husband's face, ate a Brussels sprout, and continued. "We will tell Lewis he was adopted on his 15th birthday. I'll give him the letter when he turns 16. Avery had gazed at his wife for a long while without voicing any of the questions passing through his mind. He loved and trusted Martha, and accepted that the matter had been judiciously decided. Lewis completed his daring scramble across the cliff and settled on his regular sitting rock high above the little lost river gorge. As far as he knew, he was the only person ever to sit upon this particular stone. It was his personal rock, his private retreat from the anxiety-filled world on the far side of the fence. He'd discovered it the previous May, the day after his 15th birthday. Despair had driven him out onto the cliffs, and instinct had guided him toward the upper lip of the river. By chance, he reached and climbed onto the rock just as wind gusted through the gorge and parted the frothy curtain of slippery falls. In that instant he saw a pool of water that had heretofore been concealed behind the falls. Within the pool he saw, or thought he saw, the shadow of a huge fish. It was just a glimpse, for the wind quickly died and closed the curtain. Yet the sighting lifted his downcast spirits and inspired him with a purpose. "I'm going to catch that fish," he determined, with a resolve that did not wane between then and now, despite repeated failed attempts. Indeed, in the year since sighting the aquatic monster and building his custom rod, Lewis had caught nary a minnow. That was fine with him. If merely catching a fish was all he wished to accomplish, he would have dropped a line from the bridge south of town, where the regular crowd routinely pulled in perch, pickerel, and gar. Lewis, however, was not interested in small fry. He wanted the big one, which time and his imagination had transformed into a gigantic rainbow trout more than 40 inches long. He inspected the lead on his lure, a silver spoon with a red feathered tail, drew his rod over a shoulder, and whipped it around. Line zinged from the reel. The lure plunged through the cascading wall of water and into the pool behind the falls. Or so Lewis hoped, just as he also hoped a backwash current swirled his bait seductively about. Lewis watched his line and waited, his senses soothed by the sonorous song of the falling little lost. The springtime sun fell like a blessing on his pale winter face. Time passed. Patience is the virtue of all good fishermen. It is both a task and a reward. More time ticked by. Soon the sun dipped below the western mountain peaks and flooded the canyon below Lewis's feet with shadows. He waited a brief while longer for the giant trout to strike, then reluctantly reeled in his line and retraced his path along the cliff face. He had half hoisted himself onto the ledge by the fence when he was startled by a voice and nearly fell backward. "I knew you were there!" the voice trilled triumphantly. "Your shoes gave you away!" Lewis caught himself and continued upward, and soon stood face to face with Amanda Dot. If not for the fence between them, they were close enough for kissing. An appealing notion for Lewis, yet something he'd never brought himself to try. "What's to give away?" he asked, sticking his fishing gear through the fence and beginning to climb. "I wasn't hiding." "Perhaps not," Amanda retorted, "but if you were hiding, I would have found you." "No doubt," Lewis allowed after landing on the park side of the fence and sitting by his shoes. Amanda squatted so that she was eye to eye with Lewis. "I was thinking about your problem, and I figured out what you should do." Lewis grimaced. His chest grew tight, and he had difficulty breathing. "What did you figure?" Amanda pushed an errant lock of brown hair from her pretty, round face. "It's simple, really. Don't know why I never thought of it before." "What?" "Write a letter or send an email to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. They must have some record of who you are." Lewis concentrated on tying the laces of his shoes. When he was done, he stood and inquired sarcastically, "What do you suggest I tell the people in Washington? That I was found in a basket? That some woman with a foreign accent stepped from behind a tree and foisted me upon my father?" Although Amanda did not approve of Lewis's tone, she could hear the pain in his voice and excused his scornful manner. She hooked arms with him and started walking, and waited until they were halfway across the park before saying, "You know, Lewis, you have a choice. You can feel sorry for yourself from now until kingdom come, or you can accept the facts and be happy." "I wish it was that easy." Amanda let 5 seconds pass. "Choosing happiness is as hard or easy as you make it." Lewis's chest grew tighter. Amanda had a point, of course. She usually did. Still, he couldn't quite find his happiness switch. Two. Before parting in the park and going to their respective homes,